kind of a show are you guys putting on here today? I mean, the only class in this act is sitting next to me.
Bueller.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of LeetSpeak, where we discuss all things cybersecurity, cloud, and the Internet of Everything.
Man, you are one pathetic loser.
I'm your host, Alissa Knight, and today I'm joined by Casey Ellis, the founder, chairman, and CTO of Bugcrowd, a leader in the crowdsourced vulnerability management space.
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
So if you're a bounty hunter looking to learn more about the Bugcrowd platform, want to become a part-time or full-time bounty hunter, or if you're a vendor or CISO wanting to understand how crowdsourced vulnerability management is quickly replacing traditional penetration testing, then make that next cup of coffee, sit back, close Outlook in Chrome, and stay tuned for this week's episode of LeetSpeak coming up now.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Alissa Knight.
That major hack attack against Sony. First, the studio's movies.
3 days after Target confirmed hacking payment information for as many as 40 million customer credit and debit cards.
What sources are telling us is a massive Chinese hack of U.S. government computers.
A massive data breach of the IRS was much bigger than first realized. The agency now says more than 700,000 social security information of more than 14 million current and former government employees. This comes after an economic.
Incoming message.
It's Friday, and that means time for another episode of LeetSpeak with Alissa Knight, bridging the gap between all things information security, where we'll talk the latest vulnerabilities, threats, security conferences, malware, and exploits, as well as interview CISOs and CIOs from around the world on the IT risk management topics that matter most. Alissa Knight, one woman,
One mission.
one voice, in the world's foremost authority on hacking the cloud and Internet of Things. Coming to you unplugged and unleashed in this week's new episode of LeetSpeak
With Alissa Knight.
Casey, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
What is crowdsourced vulnerability research?
Excellent question. Essentially, what we're doing and what the space is taking the latent potential and all of the skills that exist in the white hat hacker community right across the world and applying it to this whole problem of trying to discover vulnerabilities before they're exploited by attackers, but then also ideally creating a feedback loop that's more active and more valuable between people that think like breakers on the outside and the builders that are actually creating the software and setting these systems up in the first place. So it's an extension in terms of what we're doing these days. It started off really with the vulnerability disclosure model. 1995, Netscape came out and launched the first bug bounty program in the technology space. And then, towards the back of the 2000s, you started to see some of the technology companies come into it, Google, Facebook, and so on, and actually start to draw some attention to the model. Really what Bugcrowd did and what we've seen the space do since in general, like both with what we're doing and just, globally in the market, is take that initial, concept of vulnerability disclosure and bug bounty and extend on that, but then also like adapt it into some of the other use cases that, security needs people to help solve. So yeah, that's the short version.
I know when we were originally talking in our briefing together before that, I recalled just, from the 90s when, vulnerability disclosure was done on mailing lists at security focused like Bugtrack and Full Disclosure. And, a lot of especially after the acquisition of Security Focus, I want to say by Symantec, The site, the mailing lists have pretty much almost died. I think it's pretty much now just relegated to advisories from the vendors that are just using it as another communication medium for their advisors. Are those days gone? Those who are doing vulnerability disclosure that used to just blast them out to mailing lists, sometimes not even letting the vendor know ahead of time through responsible disclosure. Do you see platforms like Bugcrowd and the other competing platforms out there just kind of really replacing those old days of mailing list distributions?
Yeah, yes, I do. And there's a nuance in the answer to that. I think, the reason that, both, the work that Bugcrowd's doing and others in the space around simplifying the workflows and making the process more accessible for everyone. That's one thing that's making it easier to go down the path of coordinated disclosure and doing things in a more kind of orderly way. But the other piece of it is, as vulnerability disclosure becomes more ubiquitous, it's one of those things that's inherently viral, and it's actually pretty easy to understand. Like this concept of, we're starting neighborhood watch for our internet assets. That's a lot easier to explain to really anyone in the business or in the market for that matter than trying to explain how a firewall works or antivirus or whatever else. So there's a natural, almost snowball effect around what's happening there. There's legislative changes that are coming down the pipe and all sorts of things to basically normalize this idea of communication between the good faith hackers that are out there on the internet and the people that are responsible for user data actually having a conversation with each other around how to improve. And I think as that kind of proactive posture on the builder side of the fence gets more common, then the need for things like full disclosure starts to go away. Like full disclosure ultimately has its roots in the hacker community feeling like they've identified a risk and have a responsibility to reduce that risk, but not having a vendor that's responsive to their information or their requests. So it's almost like the lever of last resort for them to use to force the fix of the issue they've discovered. Ultimately, I see that as really only existing because of the failure of people being proactive and actually inviting these conversations in the first place, as well as being able to build out what they do with the information as it comes in.
Would you would you say that it's accurate that it really kind of went from open disclosure, full disclosure on the mailing list to the black markets where exploits are bought, traded, and sold to these sort of crowdsourced vulnerability management platforms? That then leads to another question of if services like Bugcrowd are really detracting people away from selling their exploits on the black market.
And I think, the first thing to kind of respond to that or answer that question, to me, this whole idea of like good guy, bad guy, black market, white market, it gets very fuzzy very quickly because ultimately, when you talk about, for example, a nation state, you could ask a citizen of that nation, are they a white hat or a black hat? And the answer is going to be white hat. But if you happen to be on the other end of the gun somewhere, your answer is probably going to be black hat. So that kind of paradigm, I think, breaks down pretty quickly in this space. The way I prefer to talk about it, it's just a bit cleaner, is in terms of offense and defense. So, as a vulnerability or an exploit information buyer, are you buying that information for the sake of creating a product and keeping the bug alive, which was kind of what you were just referring to as black hat, but really is offensive because it could be bad guys, governments, it could be people that are actually working in the interest of folk. It's a whole variety of reasons to do that. But the net of it is that risk stays alive and everyone who is subject to that risk stays exposed. The other side of it, which is what we do, is defensive acquisition procurement, where you're buying the information for this express purpose of actually killing that bug off and seeing it get fixed. So I think the offensive markets existed for a very, very long time. It predates the defensive market by quite a long way because, spies have been spying for ages. And I think as soon as technology became an opportunity to do that, they took advantage of that. And that's just logic. It's not really any inside baseball that I'm sharing here. But what we've seen since the defensive market started to become more popular, start to become more ubiquitous and indeed normalize in terms of pricing and expectation setting and things like that, it is impacting it. You're seeing, brokers start to talk about their offensive programs in terms of, them being a bug bounty, which I hate because, we worked pretty hard to claim that word and make it a good thing that made people feel safe, and it interferes with that. But the economics are shifting around. There's all sorts of different impacts that are happening. And ultimately what it comes down to is, for the first bunch of steps of defensive and offensive vulnerability acquisition, it all looks the same. Like a researcher picks a target, goes in, finds vulnerabilities or a chain of its things that they can exploit. They build out capability to actually create and exploit against those vulnerabilities, and then they pass it to someone. It's really what happens beyond that that's different between the defensive and the offensive models.
It's almost tackling two challenges, right? The whole responsible disclosure issue, and also lowers the lifeline of how long zero-day exploits are being exploited in the wild before both the vendor and the defenders writ large become aware of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the goal. Like, the goal is to identify, as I said before, it's two things. One is to identify where risks exist so they can be mitigated. But the second thing is really to have that learning go beyond just swatting the bug and reducing like the discrete piece of problematic code or configuration or whatever it is that's causing the issue, and start to educate the business and the people that are actually building these things in the first place at the root cause, so that they can be prevented in the future. So yeah, I mean, the net of it is that the time to live of vulnerabilities in the wild is decreasing as a result of the work that's being done, both in vulnerability disclosure, but now especially with the addition of incentive into the bug bounty space.
Well, this is a great segue, I think, into who Bugcrowd is. For our listeners who don't know who Bugcrowd is, but may be familiar with the space, other competing platforms like Synac and HackerOne. Who is Bugcrowd? What problem are you guys solving?
Yeah, sure thing. So Bugcrowd actually pioneered the space back in 2012. We launched our first programs at the back of the year from Sydney, Australia, just in case anyone's wondering where the funny accent's from.
I love the accent, by the way.
Thank you. So essentially what we did was look around at the pen test industry and some of the status quo approaches that organizations were taking to identifying vulnerabilities. So a combination of consulting work, but then things like vulnerability scanning, static analysis, just automation in general. Looking at the history of that, looking at the current state of the market at that point of time, and really, feeling like it wasn't good enough. This whole idea of automation as a lever, not as a replacement for human creativity. I think Von scanning, and now with like the addition of ML and AI and all of those good things, it's gonna always help close the gap, but there will still be a gap. Like, fundamentally, the problem that we're trying to solve here in cybersecurity is caused by humans. It's not actually a technology problem. The technology just makes it go faster. So every time we improve automation to try to get better at this type of activity on the defensive side, the attackers come up with new things, and indeed the defenders and builders come up with new attack surfaces that we've never seen before, and all of a sudden you've got to go back to square one. So this need for human creativity was part of the thing that I wanted to use to improve automation. And then on the consulting side, looking at the pen test market, and there's a ton of really, really good people that do incredible work and take great pride in their work in that space. But then there's everyone else. Ultimately what it comes back to is that there's a pretty chronic shortage of cybersecurity professionals globally. And, the business that I was actually running prior to starting Bugcrowd was effectively an outsourced pen test firm in Sydney, Australia. So I had teams set up around the world that me and my partner would front end locally, and then basically white label through companies that had the opportunity to deliver that type of service to their customers, but didn't have the people to do the work. And it was a great little business, but I'm looking at it thinking, wow, like the kind of margin structures that are possible in this space, kind of, point to the fact that it's inflated, it's basically undersupplied, and that supply-demand imbalance is causing inflation, which converts as well to a loss of quality. You end up in this position like the classic pen test bait and switch thing, where the principal consultant comes in and does all of the selling and makes the customer comfortable, and when it comes to go time, you've got a grad student who's 6 weeks into the job coming in to do the actual work. And that's common. Right. So it's like, all right, how do you fix that? I think the other problem that we wanted to address was that, one person can't outsmart a crowd of people. Like when you think about the balance that we've got on the defender side, you've got singular consultants being paid by the hour. And functionally, what we're expecting them to do is to compete creatively to solve the puzzle first, so to speak, in terms of finding the vulnerability every time and on a continuous basis against a crowd of adversaries with lots of different skill sets, and more of an incentive to create impact than a constraint defined by, how many hours in the day they're being paid for. So it was all of those things that were kind of, boiling away in the back of our mind. And then, the thing that was kind of the catalyst or the light bulb moment for it was the stuff that Google and Facebook were doing from a press standpoint around their bug bounty programs, because they started talking about, they're effective, they work, our hair didn't catch on fire, which is nice. So they're safe. We're in a position where it's actually marketable, so we're going out and telling the market about that as well. And the customers I was working with in a traditional context started asking questions about it. They were intrigued in the model, not because bug bounties are cool, because they weren't at that point. I don't think anyone really outside of the Bay Area even knew that they existed. It was more the fact that they looked at the economics and the resourcing model, and they saw it as a way to balance the equation. So that got me thinking, and it's like, all right, well, if we, remove the barriers to doing that, from a logistics standpoint, from a trust standpoint, getting payments to people all over the world, reducing the noise, so you're just dealing with the signal and so forth, and build that as the core platform and service that we create, we don't just get to accelerate the adoption of vulnerability disclosure and bug bounty, which is, by the way, the other thing that I wanted to do, keep my friends out of jail. We also get to essentially, create an army and connect that army to the problem in a way that's radically more efficient and has a far better chance of actually, defending the users of these services than what we're doing today. So that was the genesis of it. And really what we've built since is extensions of that. So we go out, we're known, I think, best as a bug bounty company, or the bug bounty company, the folks that introduced the space and have, really taken it out into all sorts of different markets outside of just the early adopters here in San Francisco. What we've also done is taken the core model of crowdsourcing and the data that we have on the crowd in terms of, what skills they have and how trustworthy they are, and basically created the same kind of crowdsourced efficiencies for things like penetration testing and so on. So other use cases where, the crowdsourced model is actually the most effective way to basically outsmart a crowd of adversaries. And really that's the vision for the company. It's like wherever a crowd is causing the problem in cybersecurity, I believe a crowd is a logical part of the solution, and that's what we're building.
So really two sides of the business. One side being the vulnerability research through, bounty hunters, crowdsourced vulnerability research through bounty hunters. And then the other side of the house being really delivering penetration testing services in this sort of new model where instead of a company or CISO hiring a little boutique penetration testing firm or even, an Accenture or a Grant Thornton to do it, they would simply go to Bugcrowd and say, hey, I need this web application penetration tested. I need this app, whatever it may be. They would take that to you, and Bugcrowd would use its vetted network of, I'm assuming, the same sort of vulnerability research to then go at those IP addresses or that web app or that application and find vulnerabilities in it in a different way. But it's sort of the same modus operandi.
Pretty much, yeah. You've hit the nail on the head. I think that there's, the easy way to break it down is that there's the public side of what we do on the private side. And when I say public, what I'm talking about is, programs like MasterCard, Tesla,
There's a bunch of others like Fiat Chrysler that exist on the platform, and they are essentially open public bug bounty programs. Like you, me, anyone listening to this could log on to bugcrowd.com right now and start hacking on those programs, because those customers have decided to engage the entire internet to help them out with their security. They're at a point of maturity where they feel like they can do that, right? That's not everyone. Like that's the very noisy and almost viral part of what we do. But what that also allows us to do is to onboard new people onto the platform, understand what their skills are, what their capability for impact looks like. Are they someone that we can vet and trust from a trustworthiness perspective, like in the traditional sense, but also assess their level of professionalism and stuff like that. And then take all of that data that we have on the crowd and use it to basically construct teams that we then deploy out on a private basis for the things that we were just talking about. And I think, in terms of where it's getting used the most, like the boutiques aren't actually the ones that we're butting heads with. We actually tend more to partner with those folks, because you end up with people in boutique pen test firms that they're in a position where they really understand how to help the customer long term, because they've been embedded in there for years, right? We're not in a position where the crowd's going to bone up on that quickly, and that's not what we're best at. What we're best at is delivering eyes on target at just a radically different scale than what the customer's used to. So what we end up doing is saying, okay, here are the things that Bugcrowd's best at that we want to allow you to scale as a boutique pen test company. Let's actually partner with you and have you deliver things on the ground that aren't as well suited for us to deliver. So you mentioned, web apps and public testing and things like that. That's the stuff that we can do literally all day. And in my mind, like pretty much 100% of that market over time in the pen test space will end up being crowdsourced, because it just makes sense. Like it's economically rational and it solves the problem. In terms of the things that are logistically more difficult, getting behind the firewall, we can do that too, but obviously the customer needs to trust that more. So that's where we'll partner sometimes. If you're talking about rare targets, that's one of those things where it's interesting because we have access to a vast network of talent. We put on an event just recently where we had a bunch of people come together and do a like live hacking event against a set of cars. And like that's an incredibly rare skill set, but we pulled it together. So we can do that. But again, if a customer has an ongoing relationship with people that really understands their business soup to nuts, it might make sense to retain that consultancy to do things downstream of the thing that we come in and start to help them with.
Right. And for the CISOs that are concerned about the security of their network or app and opening this up to a crowd versus a firm, small or large, that they can go after, correct me if I'm wrong, you actually do background checks on the hand-selected few for the private contracts.
Yeah, and this is where it's good to jump back in and remind that I actually came from the pen test industry myself. I was technical for about 6 years, moved across into solutions architecture and sales. And when I got it in my head that I wanted to do this whole entrepreneurship, build a business thing, the company that I was running prior to Bugcrowd was actually a pen testing firm. So, in terms of how we designed Bugcrowd from the ground up, it was in my mind and in the company's mind as a result, literally, designed to look as much like a pen test to the customer from a risk and a logistic standpoint as possible. And that includes trust. Like what we wanted to do and what we've done with the crowd is to get to the point where the people that we're inviting in, that, especially when we're giving them like credentialed access or dropping them off behind a firewall, like any kind of privilege that's higher than what you'd get just by being on the internet. We want to be able to say with hand on heart that we trust those people that we'd invite to the same degree or higher than your third-party consultancy would trust their employees or the people they subcontract to. So that's how we've designed that. And for the better part, it's interesting because I think the customers that have accepted that explanation, like they understand intuitively the power of the model, they've got to get over this hurdle of whether it's trusted or not. The folks that have done that and seen it all work, they become pretty raving zealots around the whole thing because they realize, well, we're on the internet anyway, so we're getting hacked anyway. So there's kind of that in the background, but also we've already been outsourcing the assessment of trustworthiness to third parties in this space like for 20 years. So really, what's the difference between that and what Bugcrowd's doing? Obviously it's a new concept. So that's honestly what we spend most of our time educating people around, because, the initial, especially when you talk about it as a bug bounty program, I think the initial assumption people have is that it's the Wild West and everyone rocks up with a shotgun or an axe or whatever and starts, banging away on stuff, and it's quite uncontrolled. But that couldn't be further from the truth. And the private version of what we're doing is by far the lion's share of the revenue of the business and the number of programs that we actually run.
In Casey, for the crowd itself, how much have these researchers made in the past historically? I mean, I'm sure the payouts can climb to be quite large. What's the amount that Bugcrowd has paid out? I mean, these researchers, these bounty hunters, make quite a bit of money, correct?
Yeah, they can. They absolutely can. What we've seen, the single largest payout that we've seen for a vulnerability, I believe, was in the order of $130,000 for a single bug, which is a good day in the office.
And take the rest of to find it in January and take the rest of the year off.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, we ran a live hacking event recently where I think 7 or 8 of the attendees walked home after 2 days with over $12,000 or $13,000 just from a day and a half or 2 days worth of work.
Wow.
So if as a hacker you've refined your skill, you understand the specific areas of hacking that you're best at, and you've kind of optimized your workflows around that, you can be very productive with this stuff. I think the highest paid individual on the platform's over $1 million. Wow. We've seen over, I believe it's 600,000 go out in a single year to an individual. So yeah, I mean, it's good. There's definitely a power law there. There's kind of the super hunters that come in and just crush stuff based on their workflow and what exists out there on the internet. I think behind that you've got a bunch of people that are doing it to keep the lights on, and their numbers are less spectacular, but it's more like, to me, those are the more interesting stories, because you got people that are actually living off this stuff. So it's not, I want to be a bug bounty millionaire. It's like, I literally just want to treat what I'm doing here the same way as a Lyft driver would treat what they do. I've got kids I got to take to school, like whatever the reason might be in the background, they want to log in the morning or the evening or whenever it is to Bugcrowd and put in their effort, get paid for it, and actually be able to contribute value to this market kind of on their terms from a time and geography standpoint. So that's where I'd like to see that go, and we're already seeing that happen, which is really exciting.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, that wasn't definitely a career option for me when I came out of high school in 1997. The idea of not having a boss, not having a 9-to-5, just waking up every morning, being your own boss, and just hacking away at stuff and hoping you find a critical bug that pays your rent and your mortgage or whatever for the year, for the month. That's interesting.
And we're working the cool thing about that as well, a couple of things to call out. We actually don't take a cut of the payment. That's not part of our model. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is that we're actually helping both the hacker and the customer reach a point that's fair in terms of where they set the price on the bugs as they're doing the conversation or the transaction of information. And we want to be in a position where we can give that input and have it be unbiased for both sides, right? So that's the first thing. But the second is that money's for the crowd. Like, that's not ours. So the more it can flow through to them to allow this type of lifestyle, and the less friction we can introduce to that process, the better in my mind.
That's awesome. That's definitely giving back. It's on the very philanthropic side of your company. So what about the challenges? What about the taboo stuff that people don't really like to talk about in this industry? Some of the issues that either Bugcrowd or the industry writ large has sort of been up against. This is really new stuff that really didn't exist a decade ago.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a topic that gets dense pretty quickly, or a question rather. Look, I think the biggest thing is the fear of hackers just in general. This is one of those ones where the paradigm, and even things like the CFAA and anti-hacking laws all around the place, that they were constructed in a time and have carried forward from a time when a hacker could only be a bad person in the popular mind. And, we in the space knew that wasn't true, but the lawmakers didn't, and I think the general public didn't. We're quickly moving towards a place where folks have a more intuitive understanding of the fact that it's more like a locksmith versus a burglar. Like they both break into stuff for a living, but one's doing it to help and the other's doing to harm.
Right.
The fact that this is sort of the digital equivalent of that and it's new means that there's a lead time until people understand that and get comfortable with it. But I do feel like that's happening. That's a big challenge. And I think, just the general trend around crowdsourcing itself, changes in the nature of work and so forth. I actually think that's a macro trend that we're basically riding in part as a business. There's different degrees of comfort around that as well, because humans are just more inclined to trust and be comfortable with someone that they can walk up to and hit over the back of the head with a newspaper if they feel like they need to, especially in security when we're doing things that can be seen as being scary in the first place, right? So there's all of that. I think the legislative piece, we've done a bunch around really creating legal safe harbor for hackers, or creating clauses that fit within a bounty brief to basically put a Band-Aid on the construct of things like CFAA, to say that, if as a white hat or someone who's operating in good faith, you follow the rules of this program, then we as an organization authorize your testing activity, which at that point, doesn't give them a free pass completely, but it mitigates a lot of the risk of anti-hacking laws like CFAA and others. That's actually at disclose.io. So if anyone who's listening is interested in that piece of it, wants to incorporate that language or even contribute to it as an open source project, I think that's an issue that's not a burning problem yet, but I can see a time coming where we're going to need to fix it pretty quickly. So part of the goal for Bugcrowd was to get ahead of that when we started doing it back in 2016. So there's that. I think the biggest thing, the probably dirtiest piece of laundry is that most of the folk that are building software and even sitting in the management suite still equate being vulnerable to a failure. In the sense that this is dirty laundry, we can't talk about it. We actually much prefer just to pretend it doesn't exist than to accept the fact that vulnerabilities are a product of human creativity, right? We're powerful, but we're not perfect. And for as long as humans are responsible for writing software and deploying systems, these things are going to continue to exist. So this kind of mindset shift from let's avoid it at all costs and wrap people over the knuckles and feel really bad about it if and when they happen, to, okay, let's try to avoid them at every cost we possibly can reasonably afford, but also accept the fact that they do and really focus instead on reducing the risk and actually educating around prevention. To me, that's the bigger problem that the market has. And I think once that particular hurdle gets cleared, all of this stuff will be a whole lot simpler.
Yeah, it's really been an adoption of the mindset, if you can't beat them, join them, from the vendor's perspective, right? Because I mean, if you look at as recent as 10 15 years ago, back when this all started, I remember vendors threatening lawsuits for vulnerability researchers. And I agree with you completely. What can be built by humans can be broken by humans. And so long as humans are writing code, you're going to have vulnerabilities. But I spoke at Black Hat briefings in 2001, and the company that I had discovered vulnerabilities in, it was a VPN appliance company. They sent lawyers to Las Vegas to make sure that I didn't drop their company name or they were going to sue me.
Yeah.
It's crazy how much has changed in such a short period of time, but I think it's just, in my opinion, creating more secure products, more secure applications. It's great to see it in that direction. So having said that, Bugcrowd is really leading the industry in this area and really created the market. What's next for Bugcrowd? What's next for Casey?
Yeah, I mean, what's next for Bugcrowd? It's as I said at the start, like the thesis that the business has, and really the vision, actually the stated vision of the company, is to level the cybersecurity playing field, and that doesn't mention vulnerability disclosure, it doesn't mention bug bounty, it doesn't mention NGPT or next gen pen test or any of that other stuff. The macro kind of the umbrella thesis is that the security problems that exist. Firstly that. Cybersecurity is an intractably human problem, but secondly, that wherever there's a cybersecurity problem that exists that is caused by a crowd of adversaries, then a crowd of allies is the logical solution to it. So, as we go forward, it really becomes a matter of building into as many of those use cases as possible, and ultimately getting to the point where we're connecting the entire global, like the entire latent potential that's out there in the global good faith hacker community with like the vast scope of the global security problem that exists on the defender side, which is also growing at a pretty alarming rate. So, we sit in the middle, and really the overarching like design thesis of the business and what we'll always be striving towards is creating as many opportunities for that builder or breaker interaction to happen and for value to be transacted as we possibly can. So, yeah, I mean, without going into too many specifics on that, I think, the release of Next Gen Pen Test kind of points in that direction. It's funny because there's people that have looked at that and felt like it came out of left field, and then there's others who have really kind of taken time to think about the model itself and just gone, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like this is like a logical evolution of like the core competencies that we've developed as a business and a platform, in doing these bug bounty programs and these vulnerability disclosure programs. So it's really more of the same with that. And I think for me personally, it's in the role of CTO now, I get to focus on that, which is really exciting. Like the thing that I enjoy doing most, with this business, but just in general, is connecting latent value with unmet demand, and then trying to see around corners in the market in terms of where the next problems are gonna pop up, and actually build ahead of that. So, the fact that I get to do that full time and, like make stuff safer, but then also provide this really rewarding experience for the hacker community is a pretty fun sandpit to be stuck in. I'm actually really enjoying that side of what I get to do more of now. And just for context around that, I started off as CEO of the business and actually stepped out of that about 18 months ago, brought in a phenomenal operator by the name of Ashish Gupta, who, he and I now work hand in hand. He's focusing on the operations and the more CEO-y side of the business. And I get to, as I said, see around corners and build into the future, which is great.
Less report writing, less profit and loss statements, and more of the fun stuff.
I spend less time looking at spreadsheets these days, which is a quiet relief. And getting to things like this as well, because I think the whole idea of educating the market around what we're really doing, I think vulnerability disclosure as a standalone concept is really important. I think ultimately anyone who works in the security industry and intends to continue to do that needs to, or will need to at some point in their career, figure out how to interact with information coming in from the outside world. And, right. The choice is to be proactive about, preparing for that and actually getting ahead of it, or waiting until you need to be reactive about it. So I do see, vulnerability disclosure in particular just becoming, a de facto kind of standard part of being on the internet. Seeing bug bounties grow is phenomenal as well. But then, as a subset, as we just talked about, this whole idea of like creating all of these new opportunities, like Next Gen Pen Test being one of them, to connect the crowd into where the problems exist and create, increased efficiency and really a safer internet for everyone. That's what we're focused on.
So, and this was something that was very surprising to me is I actually learned in my discussions with you that Bugcrowd is actually also very much a very robust cloud platform, a website, really just a marketplace that really connects, forgive the expression here, but maybe in, a social network, if you will, that connects, code writers with code breakers. And there's actually an entire platform powering this thing. So for the bounty hunters and the companies who want to bring their apps to Bugcrowd, for the bounty hunters who want to get into this, I presume it's free. They can just go to your website and sign up for an account.
Yeah.
How do they do that?
Yeah. So for the bounty hunters, it's exactly as you said. You can go to bugcrowd.com/programs. That's where the public programs are listed. As I said before, there's a ton more happening behind the scenes that are private, which you essentially have to earn your way into. But you create an account and really go from there. There's no cost associated with that. And we've added things on top of that. Jason Haddix, for example, who I work with very closely, has developed a thing called Bugcrowd University, which is essentially a data-driven curriculum for bug bounty hunters at all stages of maturity, like from the brand new folk to even the folk that are fairly experienced, to really level up their skills, right? So there's all sorts of fun stuff that you can engage with on that side of the business. On the customer side, really the focus of how we've built out, the platform, the business, and even the team that powers it, and that stands next to it and makes the whole thing work, is to reduce friction as much as possible and make it successful. Like, this model is incredibly powerful. It's also, there's a fair bit of devil in the detail, and a lot of what we've done is built out a team and a platform that actually removes the need to understand all of that or deal with all of that from the customers that are actually running the program. Like, you can engage with the hackers as much or as little as you're able to. For example, dealing with the noise that comes in with the signal, we basically take that out of the loop and triage everything. Making sure your brief's set up successfully, all that other stuff. That's all. Those are all things that we take care of, as you called out, on the platform itself, but also with this pretty phenomenal team of operators that understand how to speak hacker and business at the same time. That's kind of really what we've optimized the hire for within the company. So. Yeah, I mean, the piece on that side is to go in, sign up for an account, or contact us for a demo, and we'll go from there.
For the companies that want to do a private program with you guys, how do they just call you guys up, or can they actually do that through the website, or do you prefer they just call you guys?
Either or both. The website piece, we actually don't. We're in a position right now where we don't let people, we don't run free programs. So it's not like, hey, everyone, if you want to just YOLO start up a bug bounty program and see how it goes, we'll let you do that. We did that for a little bit, and we ended up shutting it down because, this whole idea, when you think about it, hackers and vendors don't really have a rich history of understanding each other very well. or being able to communicate.
Put it lightly.
Yeah, and that's understating it a little bit. You get what I mean? What we found is that organizations that just signed up for free, they ended up treating the program and indeed the people that were trying to help them from the hacker side really poorly. And that, impacted the overall ecosystem. So we shut that down. But what we do is we say, okay, you can do the demo, walk through, understand what the platform looks like, get in touch with us, help us understand what you want to do initially, and then work out how else can we apply this within your business? Is it a VDP? Are you looking at a vuln disclosure program? Sorry. Is there, a pathway that you're on towards launching a public bug bounty program? Is that part of your goals or your initiatives as a business? Is this about getting better return on investment from parts of or all of your consultative security assessment spend that's going out to the pen test market or to other vendors? Are you looking to augment? There's all of those different things that for each company that rocks up wanting to talk to us and work with the platform, it's going to be different for everyone. So that's really what we partner with in terms of getting it all together. But hopefully that explains how the process works. It's essentially go there, sign up, or contact us, or give us a call. Any one of those three, it's going to lead to a conversation around what the specifics of your program are. We partner with you on that to make sure that it's successful, and then we go from there.
It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
No, very, very much not. And it's an interesting one because I do think, especially in the Bay Area, and even other parts of the world where you've got companies that are very thoughtful about this and spending a lot of time being, on the front edge of being progressive in technology. Some of those are in a position to basically just figure out how to do this themselves. But what we've found is that that's actually a pretty small minority of the overall market that needs this help, right? Like you think about your Facebooks and your Googles of the world. I would trust those folk to be incredibly thoughtful and execute this type of thing on their own really well without any of our help. But how many companies out there on the internet actually look like those folk? So that's sort of how we've done the math, and for the sake of the growth and the health of the ecosystem, that's how we operate.
Awesome, Casey. Well, thank you so much for everything you've done for the cybersecurity industry, for vulnerability disclosure and transforming how that's done. And we wish you a lot of luck and appreciate all of the things that you guys have done over there. You guys are doing some really cool things. So thank you very much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks very much.